Medieval music is a vast and multifaceted sonic universe that transports us to a period in history where melodies were not merely an art form but a fundamental pillar of spiritual, social, political, and cultural life. Between the 5th and 15th centuries, from the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 to the dawn of the Renaissance around 1450, medieval music was far more than entertainment. It was a universal language that united people in a world fragmented by wars, languages, and feudal borders, a bridge between the human and the divine, and a tool for storytelling, preserving traditions, expressing emotions, and, at times, delivering veiled critiques of the powerful with a touch of roguish humor. Imagine a world without modern technology, without recordings or digital platforms, where every note was ephemeral, created in the moment, and its impact depended on the memory, voice, and passion of the performer. This comprehensive journey through medieval music will delve deeply into its roots, genres, instruments, performers, historical contexts, cultural influences, technical innovations, and its enduring legacy, with an informative tone that balances the seriousness of a monk transcribing manuscripts with the playful wit of a minstrel in a tavern full of villagers celebrating with mead. The Middle Ages span 1,000 years defined by extreme contrasts. It was an era of barbarian invasions, devastating plagues, and feudal conflicts, but also of monumental achievements like Gothic cathedrals, the philosophical advances of scholasticism, and the foundations of modern science. In this context, music was not a luxury reserved for the elite but a necessity that permeated all social strata. In a society where most people were illiterate, melodies were an essential vehicle for transmitting knowledge, laws, religious beliefs, and human emotions. Music was the glue that bound communities divided by linguistic, geographic, and political barriers, and its presence was so ubiquitous that it accompanied everything from prayers in monasteries to dances in village squares. But don't imagine a troubadour with an electric guitar performing in a torchlit castle. Medieval music was raw, often austere, and always laden with purpose, whether to praise God, court a lady, narrate an epic, or satirize a feudal lord who raised taxes without mercy. The heart of medieval music beats strongly in sacred music, the sonic expression of the Christian faith that dominated medieval Europe. The Catholic Church was not only the spiritual authority but also the cultural, political, and educational epicenter of the time, and music was its most powerful ally in connecting with the faithful and reinforcing its influence. In monasteries, abbeys, and cathedrals, monks and clerics chanted hymns, psalms, and masses in Latin, the universal language of the liturgy. Plain chant, known as Gregorian chant, is the quintessential sound of the Middle Ages. Named after Pope Gregory I, who supposedly organized it in the 6th century, though modern historians suggest his role was more of an exaggerated, honorary attribution, a sort of medieval branding. Gregorian chant is monophonic, a single melodic line without instrumental accompaniment. Picture a deep, solemn voice resonating in the stone vaults of a cathedral, with an echo that seems to lift the words straight to heaven. There were no complex harmonies or marked rhythms, just a pure melody designed to inspire devotion, calm the soul, and transport listeners to a state of spiritual contemplation. Gregorian chant was not an exercise in improvisation, though its fluidity and simplicity might suggest otherwise. Monks followed a primitive notation system called neumes, small signs scribbled above liturgical texts that indicated the direction of the melody, rising, falling, or holding steady. These neumes were not precise notes like those on a modern staff, but visual guides for musicians who already knew the melodies by heart. In an era without recorders or standardized scores, music relied almost entirely on oral tradition, and monks spent years memorizing entire repertoires. A mistake in a psalm wasn't just a wrong note, it could be seen as a sign of disrespect to God or even a bad omen. Imagine the pressure of singing a perfectly tuned Gloria during Sunday Mass while the abbot watches with hawk-like eyes, ready to note any slip in the Book of Sins. And remember, if you want to dive deeper into this topic, I've included a book recommendation in the description. If this journey through medieval sounds is captivating you, don't forget to check out the YouTube channel and subscribe. Each subscription helps us keep unearthing these historical gems with a touch of humor and passion. Gregorian chant had a profoundly symbolic and functional purpose. Every note, every pause, was designed to elevate the mind toward the divine, creating an immersive experience that transcended the earthly world. Its free rhythm, without strict measures, created a sense of timelessness, as if time itself paused within the church's walls. The melodies were simple, but their hypnotic repetition could calm even the most restless soul, transporting the faithful to a state of contemplation. The texts, drawn primarily from psalms and scriptures, were imbued with deep theological meaning, and the music served as a vehicle to make the words resonate in the hearts of listeners. For example, a Kyrie eleison was not just a plea for mercy. It was a sensory experience that connected the faithful to the divine presence. However, sacred music did not remain static in the simplicity of Gregorian chant. By the 9th century, composers began experimenting with polyphony, a revolutionary innovation that added a second melodic line to plain chant. This was a monumental shift. Suddenly, music was no longer a solitary voice but a dialogue between voices, a step toward the complex harmonies that would define later Western music. Early polyphony, known as organum, was like a timid first attempt at harmony, with two voices moving in parallel, often at intervals of a perfect fourth or fifth, creating an effect that was both austere and captivating. Treatises like the Musica Enchiriadis, an anonymous 9th century text, document the first steps of this technique, showing how monks experimented with layering melodies to enrich the liturgical sound. Organum flourished in cultural centers like the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris, where composers like Léonin and Periton, in the 12th and 13th centuries, took polyphony to new heights. These musicians were the stars of their time, though their concerts were limited to Gothic vaults rather than packed stadiums. Léonin, considered one of the first masters of polyphony, composed two-voice organum, alternating monophonic and polyphonic sections to give the liturgy a new dynamism. Periton, his successor, was even more ambitious, creating pieces for 3 or 4 voices that were astonishingly complex for their time. His work Viderunt Omnes is a perfect example. The voices intertwine like threads in a sonic tapestry, creating a majestic and dynamic effect that filled cathedrals with almost tangible energy. If you close your eyes and listen to one of these pieces, you can imagine yourself in a Gothic cathedral, with the cold stone under your feet, the scent of incense in the air, and the echo of voices resonating in the heights. But it wasn't all solemnity. Polyphony also allowed composers to play with livelier rhythms, giving sacred music a spark of energy that foreshadowed secular genres. Outside the churches, secular music offered a vibrant and lively contrast, reflecting the joys, sorrows, and mischief of medieval society. While monks sang Latin hymns to divine glory, minstrels and troubadours roamed Europe's roads, bringing their songs to castles, taverns, market squares, and fairs. Minstrels were the itinerant artists of the Middle Ages, a kind of freelance musician who lived by their wit, talent, and ability to captivate a crowd. With a lute, flute, hurdy-gurdy, or even juggling, they told stories of legendary heroes, impossible loves, and occasionally risque jokes that made villagers laugh and clerics frown. Minstrels were not just musicians. They were often storytellers, poets, acrobats, and comedians, a sort of medieval one-man band who earned their living entertaining audiences of all social classes. Troubadours, on the other hand, were more refined, often nobles or poets who composed sophisticated songs about courtly love, a romantic ideal that portrayed the knight as a devoted servant of his lady, though in practice, things weren't always so idealized. In southern France, Occitan troubadours like Bernard de Ventadorn or Arnaud Daniel wrote verses that blended passion, melancholy, and a touch of ironic humor. Their songs, known as cansos, love songs, servant, political satires, or tensos, poetic debates, were so catchy that they spread by word of mouth like a medieval viral hit, passing from one castle to another and from one village to the next. For example, a canso by Bernard de Ventadorn like Convey la Lazette Mover, When I See the Lark Move, not only expressed romantic longing but also captured the fleeting beauty of nature, a universal theme that resonated with audiences of all classes. In northern France, trouvères followed a similar path but with a more robust style, less warm and Mediterranean than their Occitan cousins. Their songs, often in Old French, dealt with similar themes of courtly love but also included narrative ballads about chivalric deeds. In the Iberian Peninsula, the Cantigas de Santa Maria, compiled under the reign of Alfonso X the Wise in the 13th century, are a unique treasure of medieval music. These songs, written in Galician Portuguese, narrated miracles of the Virgin Mary with a style that blended the sacred and the secular. Though religious in theme, their rhythm and vivacity made them sound more like folk tales than ecclesiastical hymns. Alfonso X, a king with impressive multitasking skills, not only sponsored these cantigas but likely composed some himself, making him a fascinating figure. A monarch who, between diplomatic negotiations, military campaigns, and drafting legal codes, found time to scribble scores. Imagine a medieval king, quill in hand, composing a melody while his advisors discuss strategies to conquer the neighboring kingdom. That's dedication. The Goliards, a group of rebellious clerics and students, represent another fascinating aspect of secular music. These medieval punks composed satirical songs in Latin that mocked authority, celebrated life's pleasures, like wine, love, and parties, and challenged the church's norms. The Goliard songs, collected in works like the Carmina Burana in the 13th century, were anything but pious. They sang of drinking until dawn, loving without restraint, and ridiculing corrupt bishops with a boldness that would make any abbot blush. Picture a group of medieval students in a tavern, singing at the top of their lungs about life's pleasures while the local clergy clutched their heads in dismay. These songs were a form of cultural resistance, a cry for freedom in a rigid, hierarchical world. The musical instruments of the Middle Ages were as varied as the contexts in which they were played, reflecting the diversity of a constantly evolving society. In churches, the organ was the undisputed king, though it bore little resemblance to the massive pipe organs we associate with modern cathedrals. Medieval organs were smaller, often portable, and operated with a bellows system that required an assistant with strong lungs to keep the air flowing. Their sound, though limited compared to modern organs, was ideal for accompanying Gregorian chant or filling liturgical spaces with an aura of solemnity. Outside the church, minstrels wielded an arsenal of instruments that might seem exotic today, each with its own character and function. The viol, an ancestor of the guitar with a warm, resonant sound, was perfect for accompanying love songs. The lute, with its rounded body and plucked strings, was the troubadour's star instrument, capable of producing delicate melodies or robust chords. The hurdy-gurdy, a peculiar instrument with a rotating wheel that rubbed the strings, produced a constant drone that could mesmerize anyone. It was ideal for accompanying dances or creating a hypnotic atmosphere in village squares. The rebec, a sort of primitive violin, offered a sharp, expressive sound, while the flute, simple yet versatile, could adapt to both soft melodies and fast rhythms. The harp, with its elegance and resonance, was a favorite in noble courts, while the shawm, a medieval bagpipe, produced a sound that could be described as a drone with personality. Drums, from small tambourines to larger ones, set the rhythm in dances and processions, adding a vibrant pulse to celebrations. If you've ever heard modern folk music with a medieval touch, like bands evoking Renaissance fairs, you've likely heard echoes of these instruments. Percussion also played a significant role, especially in secular music. Drums, tambourines, and rattles were used in dances like the estampi or saltarello, the medieval equivalent of a modern dance floor, but with more torches, woolen cloaks, and fewer strobe lights. These dances were fast, rhythmic, and often accompanied by clapping and shouts from participants, creating a festive atmosphere that could last late into the night. In courts, nobles hired musicians to impress their guests, showcasing their wealth and sophistication, while in villages, music accompanied folk festivals, weddings, and even, in some cases, public executions, because even in the darkest moments, medieval people seemed to need a soundtrack. Musical notation also evolved significantly during the Middle Ages, moving from rudimentary systems to more precise methods that enabled the creation and dissemination of more complex compositions. Neumes, as mentioned earlier, were an early step, but their vagueness limited their utility. In the 11th century, an Italian monk named Guido d'Arezzo made a quantum leap in music history by introducing the four-line staff and the solfège system, with the famous syllables ut, re, mi, fa, sol, la. The do replaced ut later. This system allowed musicians to write melodies with greater precision, freeing them from exclusive reliance on memory. Before Guido, Every performance was an act of faith, with musicians relying on their auditory memory to recreate melodies learned by ear. Guido was like the Steve Jobs of medieval music. He took a chaotic system and transformed it into something accessible and universal. His legacy lives on in modern musical notation, so the next time you sing in the shower or try to decipher a score, give a mental nod to this visionary monk. By the late Middle Ages, notation became even more sophisticated with the development of ars nova in the 14th century. This movement, led by composers like Guillaume de Machaut in France and Francesco Landini in Italy, brought a more experimental approach, with freer rhythms and greater attention to form and structure. The notation of ars nova allowed composers to specify rhythms with greater precision, using symbols like minstrel notation that indicated specific note durations. This opened the door to more complex compositions, such as polyphonic motets, which combined multiple voices with different texts, sometimes in multiple languages, creating a layered sonic effect that was both intellectual and emotional. Medieval music was a direct reflection of the society in which it was born, capturing its values, tensions, and aspirations. In castles, banquets were enlivened with dances and songs that served as displays of power and prestige. A feudal lord who could afford a group of talented musicians not only entertained his guests but also demonstrated his wealth and social status. Songs of heroic deeds, like the Chanson de Roland in France or the Poema de Mio Cid in the Iberian Peninsula, narrated the exploits of knights and kings, reinforcing values of loyalty, bravery, and honor. These works were performed by minstrels in grand halls, often accompanied by a lute, viol, or small drum, and could last for hours, keeping audiences captivated with stories that blended historical facts with heroic exaggerations. It was like watching an epic Netflix series, but live, with the crackle of torches and the aroma of roasted meat filling the air. In rural areas, music had a more communal and spontaneous character, serving as a means to strengthen social bonds. Folk songs, passed down from generation to generation, spoke of everyday life, work in the fields, the seasons, love and heartbreak, abundant harvests or devastating droughts. These songs were not written down but learned by ear, making them incredibly adaptable. A single melody could have different lyrics depending on the region, moment, or community's mood, like a medieval musical meme. For example, a song celebrating a bountiful harvest in one village could morph into a satirical complaint about a greedy feudal lord in another, with just a few changed words. This fluid nature of folk music made it a living form of expression, capable of reflecting the concerns and hopes of ordinary people. Music also served as a vehicle for cultural exchange, connecting regions and cultures that, at first glance, seemed distant. Crusaders, pilgrims, and merchants carried melodies and instruments back and forth, creating a melting pot of influences that enriched the medieval musical landscape. In Al-Andalus, Muslim Spain, Arab Andalusian music flourished with instruments like the oud, an ancestor of the lute with a warm, resonant sound and complex rhythms that would influence the cantigas and later European music. The muwashahat and zajils, poetic musical forms from Al-Andalus, combined texts in Arabic and Romance languages, creating a cultural dialogue that transcended religious barriers. In Sicilian courts, where Christian, Muslim, and Byzantine traditions mingled, poetic and musical forms emerged that anticipated the Renaissance, such as the songs of the Sicilian school. The influence of Byzantine music also deserves special mention. The Byzantine Empire, with its capital in Constantinople, was a cultural crossroads where Greek, Roman, and Eastern traditions blended. Its liturgical music, with its ornamented melodies and use of modal scales, influenced Gregorian chant and the music of the Crusades. Crusaders returning to Europe brought not only relics and spices but also musical ideas that enriched the local repertoire. For example, Byzantine modal scales, with their distinctive intervals, seeped into European sacred music, adding a touch of exoticism to monastic melodies. This cultural exchange is a reminder that, even in the Middle Ages, the world was more connected than we often imagine, with melodies traveling along trade routes and pilgrimages. The role of women in medieval music is an aspect that deserves special attention, as it is often overlooked in historical narratives dominated by male figures. Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th-century German nun, is one of the most prominent composers of the era. Her compositions, such as the cycle Symphonia Armoni Celestium Revelationum, are ethereally beautiful, with melodies that seem to float between the earthly and the celestial. Hildegard not only composed music but also wrote theological, scientific, and medical treatises, making her a multifaceted figure, a visionary who defied the limitations of her time. Her melodies, with a wider vocal range than typical Gregorian chant, reflect a deep connection to the mystical, as if she were truly channeling divine visions. For example, her piece O Viridissima Virga combines poetic text about the Virgin Mary with a melody that evokes the freshness and vitality of nature, reflecting her fascination with divine creation. In the secular realm, troubadours, the female counterparts of troubadours, composed songs of love, satire, and politics with their own voices. The Countess of Dieu, one of the best-known troubadours, wrote verses that challenged the gender norms of the time, displaying a boldness and poetic sensitivity that rivaled those of her male counterparts. Her song Et chantar emerda so chuiu no valria is a passionate lament about unrequited love, but also an assertion of her own agency as a woman and poet. Though fewer works by troubadours survive compared to those of troubadours, each fragment is a testament to their talent and courage. These women, often of noble or high status, used music as a form of personal expression and, in some cases, as a tool to question the social structures of their time. Medieval music was deeply tied to the cycles of life, from birth to death, and to the rituals that marked key moments of existence. At coronations, sacred hymns, often sung in Latin, reinforced the divine authority of the king, presenting him as a ruler chosen by God. For example, the hymn Zadok the Priest, though more associated with the Baroque period, has roots in medieval liturgical traditions that exalted royalty as a reflection of divine order. At weddings, songs could be both celebratory and cheeky, with lyrics that made guests laugh and, in some cases, blush. These songs often alluded to fertility, the union of the couple, or even the wedding night, creating a festive atmosphere that united the community. At births, lullabies, though rarely documented, were a way to soothe babies and pass down family traditions. At funerals, dirges like the Dies Irae evoked mortality and divine judgment, creating an atmosphere of reflection and fear that reminded those present of life's fragility. These contrasts show how music was a mirror of human emotions, capturing the joy, hope, fear, and sorrow that defined the medieval experience. In battlefields, music also had a practical role. Drums and trumpets set the rhythm for marches and gave tactical signals, such as advancing, retreating, or attacking. For example, trumpets could announce an army's arrival or signal the start of a charge, while drums kept soldiers in formation. In markets, town criers used songs to advertise goods, from fresh fish to imported fabrics, attracting buyers with catchy melodies that served as the era's advertisements. In monasteries, liturgical chants organized the day, marking the canonical hours from lauds at dawn to compline before bedtime. Each hour had its own repertoire of psalms and hymns, creating a soundtrack that structured monastic life. In this sense, music was the clock of the Middle Ages, a constant reminder of the divine and human order that governed the world. In conclusion, music in the Middle Ages was not just an art but a force that united people, from peasants in villages to kings on their thrones. It was a universal language in a divided world, a refuge for the soul, and sometimes a way to laugh at life's miseries. If you want to keep exploring this fascinating sonic world, don't forget to visit the YouTube channel and subscribe. Every click helps us continue unraveling these stories. And remember, if you want to learn more about this topic, I've included a book recommendation in the description.